Hi, this is Deacon Matt, and I'm coming to you here on the Solemnity of Saint Joseph. And I was thinking about what do I want to say about Saint Joseph today. And as I'm praying with the readings and the prayers from the Mass, what really struck me was actually the entrance antiphon for today's Mass, which is from Luke 12:42. So, behold, a faithful and prudent steward whom the Lord set over his household. That when the church said, okay, what do we want to say about Joseph? What do we want to put right at the beginning of our Mass about our Mass for Saint Joseph that encapsulates, what this holy man, represents? And it's this, that he is a faithful and prudent steward whom the Lord set over his household. Because what was Joseph's role? He was the one that was chosen by God to be the husband for Mary, his mother, to be the guardian of the incarnation, the guardian of the second person of the Trinity. You think about what a humbling act that was for God to become incarnate, for God not just to become man, but that's humbling enough to divest himself of all the glories of that divinity and put on human flesh, become a limited, finite mortal like one of us, but to become a baby, to become an infant, to become so helpless. And Joseph was the one, along with Mary, whom he chose to be his guardian, to be his protector. And so, of course, what God is going to do is he's going to choose a faithful and prudent man. We don't know very much about Joseph. Like, the very few historical details we have come from the beginning of Luke's gospel, the beginning of Matthew's gospel. But what we do know about him is he's called righteous. He's called righteous and he's called a just man. And those two words really mean the same thing. To be just is to be one who does what is right. To do the right thing. And that's, of course, what righteousness means, right? It's right there in the word right. One who does the right thing. As far as his occupation, Joseph was a builder. The popular image we have of him is he was a carpenter, but the word in Greek is tekton, which just means builder. So it might refer to a carpenter, but it could mean someone else who builds. Some people think he was a stonemason. If you look around Nazareth, it's not a lot of forest there, but there's a lot of rock and a lot of stone buildings. So it could be that Joseph was more of a stonemason. Some extra biblical historical accounts describe him as a very successful builder. He would be more like what we would think of as a contractor or a foreman or have his own building company or something. He was a successful man and he did his work very well. But he was a righteous man and a just man. And in thinking about that, it just calls to mind what some of my favorite spiritual writers have reiterated over and over again. St. Francis de Sales says this. Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection says the same. And that is, to be holy doesn't necessarily mean doing anything differently than we ordinarily do, but it's to do what we normally do, but for God rather than for man. And of course, this is assuming that what we ordinarily do is not sinful, right? It doesn't apply to all human activity. If you're doing something that's sinful, stop doing that. Don't do that. But in terms of our just day-to-day occupations, we don't have to necessarily change what we're doing to be a holy and a righteous person. But instead of doing it for man, and that includes ourselves, right? Instead of doing it for ourselves and our own benefit, or doing it because we want the praise and the accolades and the affirmations of other people, do that same thing for God. And that's what will make us holy. That's what makes us a just and a righteous person. So Joseph had his building business, and there were probably tons of other builders in the area, but Joseph was doing his work for God. He was doing it to give glory to God, and he was a good, prudent, faithful servant and a good, prudent, faithful steward of the gifts that God gave him, his abilities, his time, his talent, his treasure, anything that God instructed him with, all of these blessings. Joseph was a good steward of that. And so he was blessed to also be chosen to be steward of God's household. So let's meditate on that a little bit today, on just the humbleness and the ordinariness of Joseph's work and how that led him to extraordinary holiness and service of God. What are the things that you're called to do in your daily life as a student, right? As someone in the workforce, as someone who might, have a roommate that you have responsibilities to, as someone who might have a family that you have responsibilities to. What are the things that you're called to do in your life, and how can you do them for God's glory, right, and God's praise, rather than the glory and praise that other people may give you? Do them in a right way, in a wise and prudent way, and you can find that same holiness that St. Joseph found in whatever your situation or state in life might be. Praise be Jesus Christ.